What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the office. A beautiful late April day. Hopefully it is nice where you be. Just say thank you, everybody, for listening. Appreciate everyone tuning in and telling a friend. Thank you. A lot happening. Last week did not record one. It's been super busy. The shop it's going like crazy. Just me and Ty here for tech, and then Josie's still doing sales. So we are shorthanded. Unfortunately, I can't hire anybody else. So just us. So stuff is piling up, and we're getting things done, which is nice, but just nothing ever seems to get done fast enough. So anyway, if you are a customer waiting for something, I appreciate you very much. So anyway, big last couple weeks. So what this episode is going to be about is pretty much a tribute to my friend John Donnelly. He passed away last week, and it was a surprise and shocking to a lot of us. And if you have been in the international world for any time, you probably recognize the name John Donnelly. And so we're going to get into how I knew him, our history, and then, things like that. So if you're looking for tech advice, this probably is not going to be the episode you want. But if you want to hear some stories and some old day talk, well, then crack a beverage and join in. My first introduction to John was, 2001. I want to say maybe 2001. Maybe 2000. 2001. Anyway. So in the old days, kids, there was a page on the internet. There was a threads type page. I guess you could call it a forum at the time. I don't think they were officially called forums then, but it was a forum that was thread based, and it was called the Binder Bulletin. The Binder Bulletin was run by a guy named Bill Thiebert, and it was, of course, nationwide, worldwide. And it was pretty much, you would ask a question and then there would be 1,000 threads underneath of it with responses. It was very hard to read through and get to the answer, but that's how it used to be. Kind of like how social media is now, like on Facebook, when somebody says something and then there's all the comments underneath and whatever. That's similar to how the threads were back then. Anyway, on those web pages, there was a group for Oregon, and I think it was Oregon. Anyway, that is where I met or was introduced to John Donnelly, was on that. And there was a show up in Washington outside of Seattle that was the Northwest Binders get together. And I can't remember when they were having it. I think it was late June or early July. I don't remember, but they were caravanning up, and my Scout was running, and I don't know if I'd ever driven it that far before, but I thought, there's going to be a group of internationals. So if I have problems, I can probably get some help. So I made plans with them. And the first time I met John, it was in the parking lot, rest area on I-5, outside of Vancouver, where they had pulled over to make a stop. And yeah, John was driving a diesel Traveler, and he had his family, his first wife, Lisa, and his daughter, Megan, who was little. She was probably 5, maybe. And so that was my first introduction to John. And we went to that show and everything was fine. And since we were an Oregon group, we stuck together, stayed in touch. We had not started our club yet, but after we went to the Northwest Binders show again and then decided, I think that was 2002 then, decided that we should start our own club because we had 20 guys from Oregon that were going up to Northwest Binders. So we're like, you know what, let's have our own scout club. And remember, this is the early 2000s, so people still went out and did stuff. So we the club started meeting at the Abby's Pizza in Woodburn. And the first meeting, if I remember right, we had quite the turnout. A lot of people. And that's when it dawned on us that we could have a viable club. And so John, being John, was the president. We just all decided, like, hey, it was me, John, and Jack Campbell started that. We're the first three people, like, officially. And then everybody else came on, and so John was the president, Jack Campbell was the treasurer or secretary, I believe. And I was the young kid, and they let me be the trail coordinator, event coordinator, internet guy, because I was young and could navigate the internet. So John lived in Woodburn, had a nice little house on the main, off of one of the side streets off the main highway. Not conducive for a lot of wrenching and getting into this stuff, but it was a nice little place. And we all stayed close, lots of club events. John was always at everything. He figured out pretty quick that he was going to need multiple vehicles to be, he wanted to be the president that did everything. So he had a scout that he would wheel, and then he had a travel all that he put together that was for towing a travel trailer because the club did all these camping trips and dunes. We went to the beach a lot, stuff like that. John was always very gregarious. And if you don't have a thesaurus or a dictionary, he was very friendly, very outgoing, very loud, outspoken, backslapping, handshake, big hug. And he was a big guy. If you never met John, you only saw him on the internet. He was probably, when I met him, he was 40, probably. Yeah, because I was 21 and maybe a little older. Maybe he was 45. Anyway, he was probably 6'1", 200, 210, big long arms, big reach. So very friendly, very warm, loved to tell stories. Sometimes that get him in trouble because I think he was he liked to embellish a little bit. He would, he was a little over the top with some of his stories, but also he was the world's greatest wingman. Like he would talk you up. He would say stuff. He would, you'd have some minor role in some story, but he would tell the story in such a way that it made you the main character. Like he was very just over the top sometimes in everything he did. Like everything that John was about was like, he didn't just drink beer. He drank like crazy weird beers from foreign lands, and he had dogs. He didn't just have a regular dog. He had an Irish wolfhound. Of course, he didn't just drive when he wasn't driving internationals. Did he drive something normal? No, it was a Jaguar or a Land Rover. He had a Discovery there towards the end. So he was very maybe eccentric is the word, which may have kind of led to his eventual downfall. I don't know. But anyway, John, we had a ton of fun. We had our very first Binder B, which I think was 2005 at the Antique Powerland, which brought out a ton of people. And the club continued to grow, and John was the center of that, and just kept growing. And the way things were going, you thought that the club would just last forever. Eventually, what happened, John ended up getting divorced from his first wife. It was messy. It really damaged him. They had moved to a new place just outside of Woodburn, still very close in town, but outside on a couple of acres, old farmhouse, detached shop, detached garage, couple acres of field. So John would have like plow days where guys would bring their antique tractors out there and they would just turn over a couple rows of dirt, not actual farming, just making sure everything worked and whatnot. But John's place, the new place, was just like the envy of the club for a lot of us, because it was this old farmhouse that had been kind of updated, but still had old bones, hardwood floors, weird casement windows, like that kind of stuff that just, it was cool. The shop, of course, it was uninsulated because it's the valley. I mean, the Oregon Valley, like, it rains all the time. So the most important thing about living on the west side of Oregon is to have coverage. You got to have, everything has to be undercover or it's just going to get rained on constantly. So it was more important to have a good roof and good walls than it is to have insulation, because the weather is very temperate. I mean, in the wintertime, it'll get down into the 30s here and there. But I mean, like, for example, right now over there, the low was 55 and the high was 65. Like, there's no change. And so anyway, John's place was great. Like, there were all these work parties and people would bring stuff and the club would get together and there'd be big barbecues. And like, it was just, John was really the center of that atmosphere for a long time. Even after his divorce, it definitely shook him, but he, persevered. Later on, met a lovely lady named Loretta. She was very good for him. She was more aligned with his values, his history. She understood where he was coming from. They just were more suited for each other. They did a lot of volunteer work for like the Sumter Railroad. They ran this, helped run the steam train there at Sumter on the holidays and stuff. And they were very, very much suited for each other. And that, that made him happy. I know he had a couple of job changes that kind of shook his life up a little bit, but he always was into the internationals and just stayed with that. I moved away in 2009, 2010, and I had my own drama. I was homeless for a little while, ended up bankrupt. I lost pretty much everything. And, I lost touch with the group because the forum pages, social media was starting up, Facebook and stuff in 2009. And I didn't need the forum pages as much. I just wasn't in the group anymore as often or whatever. I wasn't going to meetings. I'd had several girlfriend changes at the time, and I was not in the great place to go into club meetings either. I just didn't have the bandwidth for that. And I ended up moving away, and I lost touch with several of those people. And over the years, John and I would pass comments to each other, or we'd see each other on the Facebooks or whatever, but I had kind of grown out of the club and moved on from that sort of stuff. But John was always friendly, and we'd, of course, become Facebook friends and, commenting on things. But John John had started to, what's the word? As we get older, we kind of deteriorate, we slow down, things are different. He ended up having a heart attack in his early 60s or late 50s because he was a big dude, and Loretta fed him well. And he probably was, went from 200 to 275, maybe, I don't want to say 300, but he got big. His overalls were big. And I think that affected his heart. He ended up having a heart attack, or maybe more than one. And I think that rattled him, and he lost some weight and was active again. But from then on, he just wasn't ever really the same John. Tried to get him to go out and do stuff, and he just, always had an excuse why he couldn't. Just, I think depression, maybe. I don't know. And, all this stuff is coming from a place of love and friendship. John was instrumental in a lot of my early life and business stuff and learning this stuff. And if it weren't for John, a lot of my life would be different, I think. And so I don't want to sound like I'm disparaging or trash talking him or anything like that. I am sympathizing and sympathetic with him because I see some of that stuff in my own life. I can understand why you have a traumatic experience and you want to shut down for a little while. And so I, understood that. But we got to a point where everyone that was still friends with him, we tried to get him out and to do stuff. And he would, Josie and I stayed there a few years ago as like a base camp for when we were going to Steam Up, which John just lived a couple miles from the Steam Up at Antique Powerland. So we were staying at John's. We set up the rooftop tent on the truck there in John's driveway and side field, and had a great time catching up with John. And John, again, telling all the stories to Josie. I mean, Josie and I had been together but 5 or 6 years by then. And so I'm like, John, you don't have to sell her on me. She already likes me. But he, telling stories and things like that. And John was also a veteran. I think I missed that part. He was an Air Force veteran, worked as a flight engineer. I think a C-130. C-130 was his main platform. And so Josie, being the veteran, friend of veterans that she is, they got along great. So yeah, they hit it off. And anyways, John, so we sat down there and talked for hours like we had never separated. John, he was a great guy, and super friendly and all that. So I, the bummer thing about him passing, I'm not going to go into how he passed, but I just want to say that he didn't do himself any favors the last couple of years, not taking care of himself and just kind of going down that road of a vicious cycle, where you don't take care of yourself, and then something bad happens, and then you feel worse about yourself, and then, you just kind of spiral out. And I'm generalizing. But anyway, he did what I cautioned against in several of my previous podcasts. As of right now, as far as I understand, because I've been kind of close lately, no one can find his will, or if he even had a will. There is projects in his field that belong to other people. I have stuff in his shop that I had purchased in our deal a couple of years ago that I did not get out of there because I thought I had time. There is a lot of unfinished work, projects, trucks, things like that, nobody knows whose they are. Nobody knows the stories. Loretta knows a little bit about them. My friend Colin knows a little bit. But John was, not forthcoming with details on some of this stuff. And now the family has to clean the place up and nobody knows anything. So I'm hoping that there's a memorial service. I apologize if you're listening to this later, but John's memorial is May 16th at the Methodist Church in Woodburn, 10 a.m. Yeah, 10 a.m. So I'm hoping when I go to that I can help facilitate in getting the stuff to the right people and help Loretta get things straightened out. And, because I know one of the trucks out there belonged to a guy that, wants it back, but John was working on it or whatever, had plans to work on it. And so I'd hate to see that the family, send that off to the crusher because nobody knows anything. So anyway, that's a lesson for you guys that are getting older. And I mean, John was like 64 or something. Like, he was not old. He was not old at all. And so, you guys that you think you got time, you need to get your stuff in order. You need to write down, even if it's not an official will, even if it's, notebook paper that you write down your wishes, and it might not be legally viable. I don't know, but at least your family will know what you want to do, what your plans are, what's happening. So, John, I believe he thought he had more time, and, we all think we have more time, but, get your stuff in order. Let people know what is what, labels, tags, photos, whatever. Just get your stuff together so that if something bad does happen to you, it's not a burden on your family, because poor Loretta is having to sort through all of John's stuff, and it's not good. It's not good. So anyway, that was my tribute to John Donnelly. Yeah. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you for listening. Hug your loved ones. And till next time, I'm Dan.